Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments.
Thanks so much for tuning in. On this episode of Forward Obsessed, we talked to John Owen, co-founder of JetBlue. Yeah, JetBlue, the really awesome airline. I'm so excited for you folks to dig into this. Just a quick reminder before we get into what this episode's about, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you tune into your podcast. If you can leave us a review, we'd really appreciate it because it helps us get more amazing people like you tuning into the show. On this episode, we talked about the journey from Southwest Airlines all the way to the founding company around JetBlue. We talked about culture. We talked about psychic income. So many interesting things around how to build cultures that win, how to build cultures that scale. John is an incredibly humble, and the sense of humility and calm that you're going to see in this episode is really inspiring. I think we need more leaders like John to be able to build, inspire, and motivate teams and companies that go on to win. Thanks so much for tuning in to Forward Obsessed. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome back to this episode of Forward Obsessed. Today we have an incredible guest, John Owen, the co-founder and former CFO of JetBlue. I'm sure you know the name. John, welcome by way of New Canaan, Connecticut. It is a pleasure to have you on the show today. My co-host,
Pete Senna, nice to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So John, we like to go back to the beginning of time, of your time. Not the beginning of time. We'd like to go back to understand where entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship comes from and where it was born and where it's seated. And we try to find the thread in your life. So tell us about your upbringing, where you grew up. Tell us about your parents, what they did for a living. Let's see if we can find some.
There's no real seeds there, but
we've heard that before, but we will find seeds.
I grew up in small town Oklahoma.
Okay.
My dad was a doctor. My mom was a housewife. You know, she raised 3 sons. And
private practice?
Private practice.
So he was an entrepreneur. Okay.
A poor one, yes. He was a doctor.
Most doctors are.
Yeah, most doctors don't know how to run an office.
Yeah, that's true.
And he definitely fit that bill. He was a good doctor and an internist, specialist in cardiology, but he didn't know how to run a business.
I prefer a good doctor over a good businessman.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah. It's, you feel challenged when you're in a doctor's office that's treating you like a billable instead of a human being.
Correct.
And I think that theme comes up in your life later on, right? Yeah. Bringing humanity back to business.
That's true. That was David's tagline. It worked very well at the beginning of JetBlue.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll come back to that. You grew up there in a small town, but you had some big businesses there, right?
Yeah, the small town I lived in actually had the headquarters of 2 major oil companies in it when I was little. So there were several large businesses in town.
Mm-hmm. Did you have exposure to the business people at those companies as far as like your friends, parents and stuff like that?
No, not really.
No. And so you left, so you went to college. So you go to college after living in this small town in Oklahoma. You went to Southern Methodist University. Where's that?
In Dallas.
That's in Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
Okay. And then you went to Wharton.
Right.
Right out of college.
Yes.
What made you do that?
I hated school. I was very good at it, but I hated it. I was just bored. And I knew if I ever left university, graduated and got a job, I would never quit the job and go back and get an MBA just because I didn't like going to school. So I thought the best thing to do was just get it over with. So I did. May not have been the best decision, but that's the decision. Today, I don't know that they take anybody into an MBA program who didn't have prior work experience, but they did back then.
Certainly one of the most prestigious MBA places in the world, though. So not a bad place to pick one.
Yes, it was a good place. It was a radical culture shock.
Say more about that.
Philadelphia was pretty much a dump back in the 70s. And, having been in Oklahoma and Texas and then living in an extreme urban environment like Philadelphia, that was a real change.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about just, I've had a few guests on the show with David that have gone to Wharton, and we've sort of heard that it's a special place, not just because it's, Ivy and accredited and all that kind of stuff, but like, what was it about your experience at Wharton that you think really shaped the way that you think and ultimately helped you as you went on your entrepreneurial journey?
I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Was
makes-
it
what
the
makes-
network or the people that you met there, or maybe just anything special about it? It was just another degree.
It was just getting your ticket punched.
Okay.
What made you a good student? You said you were good at school. I was not good at school. You were mediocre?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I paid attention, I was a good student, but usually the non-linear way that's like just like 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm more of a 1, 4, 3, 2 kind of person. So
Okay.
I didn't like school and didn't do great. But yeah, what made you a good student? I'm just curious to understand for folks that are listening to this now that might be, exploring their education journeys.
Basically, just smarts ran in my family. And so, I was like straight A's in high school and almost straight A's in college, Phi Beta Kappa, it all was easy.
Are you disciplined? Are you a disciplined person?
Reasonably so, yes.
Yeah. Focused? You organized? Like, what is it about your personality that makes you a good student? I'm curious just to see if there's a pattern that comes out of being a good student that also translate into business.
Well, it starts with being responsible, doing the work, being organized, and that pretty much summarizes it. It's not that hard. It wasn't anyway for me to be a good student as long as, you read the material, you did the homework, and, you reviewed before tests.
You make it sound easy. Do you have a family?
Yes, I do.
And were you able to pass down did that trait sort of flow through the DNA, or did you pass that down in some way to your kids? Were they good students?
Yeah, I have 2 daughters who were, brilliant and great student. They were great students in high school and college as well.
Nice. Okay. After your MBA, you landed at American Airlines, correct?
That is correct.
Now, you had if I'm not mistaken on that, looking at the show notes, you had a pilot's license as well?
Yes, I got a private pilot's license when I was in college.
Okay. Why did you do that?
I was curious. I wanted to learn about it. You think about it. I grew up I was a kid during the space race. And you're sitting there in the 60s, like watching, Mercury and Gemini and Apollo and the moon landing and all that kind of stuff. And my younger brother actually took a high school type class that involved, the basics of learning to fly. And he was actually doing this before he was old enough to drive. And so I would take him to the airport so that he could have his little flying lessons. And one day his instructor said, come on, you should try this out. And I did, and I got hooked. And so I spent a summer working nights on the golf course, watering greens and tees, and then spending all that money in the daytime taking flying lessons.
I love that.
Do you still fly?
No.
When did you stop?
Basically in college.
Oh, so you just got your license and then walked away.
Yeah. It was pretty much, I got involved in work, and flying's not an inexpensive hobby. It's expensive. And so it just wasn't a priority, and I got married, and it's like, I don't have time to go and just bore holes in the sky for fun. And I didn't have a real use for the license. But it gave me some reasonable background.
What do you think it is about flying and sort of like mankind's like obsession with space and flying and exploration? Like, what do you think it is about that made so many people like yourself kind of get driven to do that or learn about it? I'm just really curious to understand that spark.
The reality of it is, what do? We walk around on land. Birds can fly, but we can't. And this gives you an opportunity to get off the ground. And the world does look very different from up there.
I love that.
So I have a desire to get my pilot's license one day.
Yeah, you always have. I remember
Always
since I first met you.
But to your point, work gets in the way. And the one reason why I want to fly is freedom. There's a certain sense of freedom up in the air.
Correct.
You can go in, you can get to different places faster, no traffic. There's a sense, it's the focus that you have to have on the instruments and the details allow you to disconnect from everything that's going down below.
Yeah, it sounds a bit euphoric, right? Just like that idea of you're in control of this vessel.
Yeah.
And not only is your life on the line, but the life of others is on the line as well. So, no, it's curious. I appreciate you sharing that. And the birds thing really resonates with me. So you were going to...
So this quick passion that you had in college that drove you to flying now in happenstance happens to collide with American Airlines looking to hire MBAs, correct?
Right.
So a small passion leads to your career, which would then stay in the aerospace world. What happened with American Airlines? Why were they hiring people? What was it? What was going on? How did you land that?
American announced late in '78 that they were relocating their corporate headquarters from Midtown Manhattan to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'd gone to college in Dallas. I liked Dallas. I had a girlfriend in Dallas. So I'm like, hey, here's a company that's relocating there. And they were interviewing on campus, and it was perfect. Or so it seemed. As it turned out, they had a lot of people who chose not to relocate. And so they had a lot of backfilling to do in a lot of departments. And this was if I recall correctly, it was the first year that they had ever really interviewed on campus, that they had previously hired in the finance department, financial analysts and senior financial analysts. They previously hired them through recruiters, people with prior experience. So this was a bit of a test to hire straight out of school. And so I interviewed, and I got a job in the controller's department in an area called profitability analysis, and spent 6 weeks receiving a brain dump in New York City from all the people who weren't relocating, as they tried to pass along as much institutional knowledge as they could, and then moved to Dallas.
At what point did you start to realize that things were not going to be all sort of roses and petunias, that it was going to be a little bit difficult there?
Didn't take long.
Were people honest when they were giving you the brain dump? Were they telling you to look out for certain things, or?
No, nobody was giving you political caution or anything like that. It was more a matter of
here's the spreadsheets.
Here's how you do the job.
Got it.
And this is, back before spreadsheets.
Oh, before spreadsheets.
Yeah,
Wow.
We're talking late 70s. So you didn't have Excel or the things that came before it.
Ledgers.
Yeah. So all the work you did was on a mainframe.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a printer with, wide sheets of paper with the little holes down.
Dot matrix printers and all that, yeah.
Daisy wheel.
Daisy wheel, okay.
Yeah.
Before the dot matrix.
Yeah. I'm talking, daisy wheel printers, and you're logging on to a mainframe, and you've got an old style telephone that you cram into the 2 rubber cups on a modem.
Wow.
And that's how you did your work.
Wow.
I think that's That's interesting to me, right? Like I'm a tech guy, and obviously like nowadays everybody's talking about AI and all this other stuff, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of different things throughout your career. I have to imagine the physicality of being kind of connected to the data, while it might have been annoying back then, it's a bit refreshing. Nowadays everybody's like, oh, just send that file here, send that file there. It's a little bit haphazard, but like you had to put some physical work into that as well, right? There's a connection to it. Does that show up for you at all or not?
Yeah, it's amazing, when you think about what changes in your lifetime, and just looking at that kind of technology. I used a slide rule in high school. And then it was the old 4-function calculators with the red lights and the charge that would last like 2 hours and things like that. Before all of the technological change came about. So that's been pretty radical when you think about the changes over the last 50 years.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I appreciate you sharing that. It's so interesting to me, seeing all the different technological changes, because like when I think about where this story will likely go to throughout this conversation, I look at JetBlue as one of the most, technologically savvy, experience-driven organizations and brands in the world. And I'm a huge fan of it. So I can't wait to go there. But thanks for sort of taking us back to that early part of it, because the tech guy in me is excited to hear that. So now here you are, you get this brain dump, you're going through, you're doing it the original way to do it before spreadsheets. And what clicks for you? When do you realize that this culture and it is about politics and bureaucracy, as you shared sort of in the green room before? Like, what was it that kind of showed up for you?
There were a lot of good indications that it was not the kind of culture I would want to be in. And I didn't know, frankly, I was naive about the whole concept of corporate culture. But it was very clear that it was a highly political environment. It wasn't necessarily how well you did the work. It was how well you sucked up to certain people. They had analysis paralysis, very bureaucratic. And it was, if there was one incident that kind of drove it home, it was working on a project related to opening a new overseas route from DFW that involved having to buy some specific airplanes to operate it. And we were supposed to, take the data and crunch it and determine what the profitability for this proposed route was. So, the marketing department had given us their forecast of traffic and everything, and we put everything together and came back and said, it's going to lose a ton of money. Well, that wasn't what marketing wanted to hear. So the next thing you know, it was, well, we're going to get connections from here and there, and we'll add all this extra traffic. So we crunch it again, and still lose this money. So they just kept adjusting the inputs until they got the output they wanted.
Fudge the numbers to make the story match.
You bet. And then the American bought the 3 airplanes in order to go do that on the used market, and refitted them and started flying it. And lo and behold, the traffic that they got on the route was pretty much the original marketing traffic plan, and it lasted less than a year, and American bagged it.
Wow.
But not before losing a lot of money along the way. And I started like, that's not the way a business ought to run. So that was disheartening, disillusioning, to put it mildly. But then the other thing that happened is, while I was there, the company went through a couple rounds of layoffs. And as part of that, they instituted a salary freeze. It's like, okay, I can understand that. Except they didn't institute a salary freeze for new hires. So I would go and interview people on campus, MBA students. We'd hire them. They'd come into, various departments within the finance organization, because they had to pay a market rate to get people. they were bringing in new people at higher pay than those of us who worked there, who were basically coaching and mentoring the new people. And I was like, this is brain dead. I just, it didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But the ultimate, though, was I got my first annual performance review. And they rated you on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 was best.
So you got a 6.
I got a 3. And it was really interesting because, my boss sat down with me and he goes, look, you were our test case for our department to hire somebody straight out of grad school. And, you've nailed it. You're great. You're more capable than, other people in the department. We give you tougher assignments and everything else. You're doing awesome. And so then it got around to the number on the form, and they rated me a 3, which meant met expectations. And I said, excuse me, I can't accept that based on what you just told me. He goes, well, we thought you were going to be awesome, and you were awesome, so you met expectations. I was like, so how can I ever exceed expectations if that's the way you do this? So it was things like that just made no sense to me.
So you basically got an MBA, a second MBA on what not to do in companies.
Oh, I say that a lot.
Yeah.
I've said that many, many times, that my time at American taught me how not to run a business.
So your biggest lesson was to focus on culture, or was there something larger than that?
No, it wasn't until I got to Southwest that I truly understood the immense value of a corporate culture.
Okay.
And I want you to unpack that, because Southwest is like a textbook case study for like amazing customer service and all these different things. And
right.
I've read a lot of the cases just, academically.
Sure.
Help a person who doesn't have the inside knowledge that you have, or someone who's, maybe read all these cases like I have. What's the difference between a corporate culture like American at the time, again, and a corporate culture like Southwest? And like you had said, like what is and what isn't. I'm just trying to understand, like, if I had sort of like a T-chart here, what does that look like?
Well, the key to Southwest was to focus on people. Full stop, end of story. I've often said that every company has a culture. You either actively make it, which can be good or bad, or it'll make itself. And the focus from the top, the whole time at Southwest, Herb and Colleen, was basically on reinforcing the culture. And it was done in a lot of ways. An example would be, we were always the underdog. We were the small little carrier that the big guys picked on. Pitching the underdog story is a great way to rally people to a cause. Yes. And Herb's view was he liked people who viewed Southwest as a cause. We were there to bring good service and low fares to people who had been getting ripped off by the big carriers. And so he gave you, this aspiration that you were part of this team to go and accomplish that. So, that's a good example, I think.
I love that. Heroes and villains, right? The other guys are the villains and we're the hero and we're the underdog. We're going to get it done.
Right.
I've often advised the state of Connecticut to take that approach, to take a rally from behind approach, because they're a small state that has lost their way in many ways, next to two giants with Boston and New York City to the north and south, that they should stop touting how incredible they are and start to take more of an approach of a come-from-behind victory, a ninth inning, 2 outs, type sort of come from behind that people love, a good rally story. So I can relate to that.
Yeah, I think it's easier said than done, and it's easier to do in an organization.
It's true.
But for all the things that I didn't like at American, I love Southwest.
So
I found a home, and it was just a great place to work. And then, the thing about Southwest is it's not like Southwest paid particularly high. Southwest didn't. And I remember being in a meeting once in New York negotiating a deal with our associate general counsel was there with me, and one of the investment bankers said, why do you folks work at Southwest? You could make more money somewhere else. And she goes, yeah, we know we could make more money somewhere else. But she said, we get psychic income. And I thought that was a great term.
Psychic income. Unpack that for me.
You're proud to work there. You enjoy working there. It's not, oh, I got to go to work. It's, oh, I want to go to work. Again, being part of a team, being part of a cause.
you referred to was it Herb?
Yes, Herb Kellerher.
That he was amazing.
Yes.
What made him amazing? If you could coach a CEO today to be amazing, what are the things you would teach him? Or her? Or they?
There were so many things that were remarkable about Herb. He was, brilliant. He was a great strategist. He was a stunning motivator. He had almost a politician's ability to remember people, faces, names. He had thousands of people, I think, who probably thought that they were Herb's best friend.
He made people feel special.
Yeah, he made people feel special. Absolutely. And he was just a great leader. Example, he was speaking one time and brought up the old axiom that the customer's always right. He goes, no business should run that way. And of course, the room goes silent. Everybody's going, huh? What are you talking about? He goes, sometimes the customer is a jerk. Sometimes the customer is a liar. Sometimes the customer is just flat out wrong. If you say the customer is always right, what you're saying is, I'm not standing behind my staff.
Mm.
His approach to things was, customer can complain, we'll investigate it. If they're right, we'll apologize. If they're not, we stand behind our employee.
So support is, so he made them feel special both as as a person, but also as a supported person on the staff.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in a customer service business, whether it's people at the airport or people on board airplanes, flight attendants, pilots, reservations people, you're always going to wind up with people who are going to complain. And Southwest did an outstanding job of managing customer complaints.
Tell me something.
Well, I was going to say, just if I could continue for a second. So coming from finance, and you were the treasurer at Southwest, you're in the pipes of the business. You're in the plumbing of the business. It's hard to see the strategy. What was it like to see a leader like Herb? You said he was brilliant and he was a great strategist. From the plumbing, you don't always get to see that. What was it about his strategy? How did it come to life for you? What were the lessons? Were there any lessons in strategy that you learned from watching him work?
One of the most amazing things was Southwest's ability to do things quickly. It was just amazingly entrepreneurial. Yes, we did financial analysis, but then we made decisions, we executed on them. A great example was in the early 90s. U.S. Air had bought PSA out in California, and American had bought AirCal, and they both screwed them up and eventually started winding down those operations. So here was this opportunity to move into the north-south business in California in a big way. And so Herb launched what he called the ground war followed by the air war. The ground war was to get the gates and the ticket counter space and everything at the airports, and the air war was to add more planes fast and go hire a bunch more people and start a lot of new routes. Since I'd been the person who'd been financing airplanes, I became the person when we needed more airplanes than were on the Boeing order book to go out and find used airplanes. So I became the used airplane shopper as my piece, my cog in the big wheel of executing that strategy.
What's buying a used airplane like? I mean, I have to ask, how do you buy a used airplane? Do you have like a whole team of people that are analyzing the mechanics and the maintenance of these things? I'm just curious.
Yeah, basically I would handle the business aspect of it, and the maintenance department would handle the evaluation of the airplane.
To critique the plane to see how. Yeah, understood.
Which, is physical, but it's also paperwork. A commercial airliner is worth nothing if you do not have the records to prove all the maintenance that's happened on it.
Got it.
So there's a lot of sifting through paperwork to figure out what's the history of the airplane, what are the ways it doesn't match your fleet, where you'll have to modify it to bring it into compliance to match your fleet, and that sort of thing.
Understood.
So I want to ask two questions that I think someone with the leadership caliber of you would be able to provide some really interesting thoughts on. So one of the things when you were describing Herb Kellerher to us in prepping for today, you described him as smart and a bit of a workaholic and really driven on driving things forward. As a leader myself, one of the things that I'm curious to understand is you mentioned the customers complaining and how Herb stood behind teams. What do you do when the teams are complaining and that starts to create internal challenges inside of a culture? How do you as a leader go about modeling the right behaviors and changing that? Because the reason I asked that question selfishly is that I'm noticing two behaviors that seem to be occurring in a lot of the modern day workplaces. One is a lack of work ethic seems to be pretty prolific and growing. And then the second is it seems like people, because of a lot of the mental health factors in this world, this country, tend to also be kind of showing up in a way that might be more complaining than usual. So my question for you is just drawing on some of those leadership principles. What do you do when the employees are complaining, and how do you get that Herb Kellerher kind of mindset modernized to today in the workforce?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that.
Okay. I'll take any answer. It doesn't have to be good.
No, I'm just not sure.
Okay.
And partly it's because you didn't have complaining at Southwest or at JetBlue. There's plenty of toxic workplaces where people live to complain. And speaking of toxic workplaces, one of the things that Herb focused on was hiring for attitude. The idea was we can teach or train people how to do most jobs, but you can't train attitude. Attitude is more innate.
Attitude than aptitude, right?
Yeah. And he would stress over and over the damage that can be done by a bad apple. He goes, look, we're not perfect. We'll make hiring mistakes. The key is if you make a hiring mistake, admit it and get them out of here. And the woman who was the head of the people department at Southwest and later became head of people at JetBlue, Ann Rhodes, she used to talk about the value, this was at JetBlue, the value of the corporate culture when it came to bad hires. She goes, if the corporate culture is strong enough, it will cause that person to realize that they don't fit in. And she referred to it as self-ejecting.
Love that.
You know, you'd like them to self-eject. If they don't, then you need to take some action. But it was all a matter of, you know, ensuring that you had the right kind of people who really wanted to roll up their sleeves and work and weren't malingerers and weren't going to, you know, be, you know, spending their day focused more on office gossip than on trying to, you know, meet the needs of the company.
Love that. Really, really appreciate that answer and perspective. It's inspiring and I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of that. So thanks for that.
Yep.
See, you did have a good answer. You're just being humble about it.
So now things start to change. Things start to change over time at Southwest. You have this great culture, this amazing leader, and then Southwest buys their biggest competitor, Morris Air.
Well, I wouldn't say they were our biggest competitor.
Okay.
Because we really didn't compete with them.
Okay.
You know, prior to buying Morris Air, the biggest way we competed against them was they were modeling themselves after Southwest, and they were acquiring the same used aircraft we were acquiring. So, you know, first I ever heard of Morris was when I would be talking to somebody about potentially, you know, buying or leasing their airplane, and they would take it off the market because this outfit in Utah called Morris Air had signed on for it. But Morris Air was David Neeleman's first airline. He started it as scheduled charter. It was hiring an outside firm to fly airplanes, and it was an example of how it worked was a once-a-week flight to Hawaii. And so he'd arrange for the operator to fly the flight, and he arranged with condo folks, and he'd sell packages, and it became essentially a scheduled charter operation, for lack of a better term. And then Alaska Airlines filed a complaint with the feds saying, hey, this is a real airline. Make him be a real airline. He needs to get an operating certificate and officially, you know, be a real airline with their own pilots, their own planes, their own flight attendants, and all of the rules and requirements that go with being an airline. So we did. And built it from nothing to, if I recall, they had 21 airplanes when we bought them in about 2 years.
Wow.
It was rapid growth.
What was it about his mindset? I mean, obviously, you're going to tell us more in the partnership, but how do you believe, I mean, that's really, really fast growth. 2 years, 21 planes. I mean, how do you do that?
David's an impatient person. He's just always in a hurry.
No, I don't know any other Davids like that.
So it's just the way he's built and wired.
I love people like that because they get shit done.
He's a natural entrepreneur. If ever there was somebody who was just made to start businesses, David Neeleman is that kind of person because he thinks everything's easy. He hires people and they work through all the details. And David's the big picture guy. So anyway, he built this airline, and at the same time, United Airlines launched an airline within an airline on the West Coast as an outright attack on Southwest Airlines. And so we were trying to figure out ways to take on United, and Herb had me continuing to prospect for used airplanes, and I said, Herb, 2 years ago, there were 40 some odd of these on the market. I said, we've picked up 20 something. The guys out in Utah have picked up the rest. There isn't anything else out there. And of course, we were ordering more from Boeing, but there's a lead time associated with ordering from Boeing.
Yeah, there's only so many airplanes that get made every year, right?
Yeah. And then one day our CFO got a phone call, and it was from the folks at Morris, and said, we'd like to know if Southwest would like to buy us. And of course, David worshipped Herb Kellerher. He had a folder full of cut-out newspaper articles about Southwest. He modeled so much at Morris around Southwest. And it was like, we're going to be like them. And he'd hand the folder to people, in management when he hired them, saying, read this. This is the template of how we're going to, build this airline. And I've never fully understood, never really asked why they chose to sell as opposed to like taking it public or something. But we did the due diligence on the company, and it was like, here's an opportunity to get a whole bunch of airplanes to deploy into a variety of new markets in the Pacific Northwest. Because at that time we were mostly Southern California to Northern California. United had that, and they also had from San Francisco north. I was like, okay, if we can add Seattle and Portland and Spokane and Boise and places like this, then we're a much better matchup against United.
What was going on in Morris's business? I'm sorry to interrupt you. So I get really into these stories. So it was a market expansion play and an asset expansion play.
Yes.
Was Morris distressed at the time because they grew too quickly? Like, was there financial issues?
No. I mean, they were roughly a break-even carrier, so it's not like they weren't wildly profitable, but, they were not in distress.
Okay.
Fall of '93, we did the due diligence, and the deal closed, if memory serves, on December 31st.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. And so it was during due diligence that I got to meet David Neeleman, because I was treasurer, my assistant treasurer, and I and the associate general counsel basically had to read through 21 leases of airplanes as part of the due diligence, and see what we needed to do and work out deals with lessors to try to extend terms and make a variety of modifications to them and that sort of thing.
So a lot of red pens got used.
Pardon?
A lot of red pens and red ink.
Yes. Yeah, back in the days when you mostly marked up documents with pens as opposed to track changes in Word. So David and I hit it off right away because he'd been the guy who was acquiring all the airplanes for his company. Literally as the CEO, he was the guy who was shopping for the airplanes. And so we had all these war stories to tell about, how he got that airplane and I got this airplane and, that sort of thing. And we became friends with a kind of a common bond there. So that's how it all started.
So that must have been a dream for David to sort of like sell his company to his hero, right? In some cases.
Yeah. And
I've heard a myth that says never meet your heroes in real life because you realize that they're just humans behind the hero. Is that how David felt about Herb after the acquisition?
I don't think so, no. The thing with David, I believe he was set up to fail at Southwest, completely unintentionally. He came on board, he was made a vice president, and no one took David under their wing. You understand, he was a natural entrepreneur. He led a business. He made snap decisions. He made a lot of gut decisions. His gut's really good. Sometimes it's wrong. And our job at JetBlue was to try to weed out the places where we thought his gut instinct was wrong. But nobody explained to him what it was like to no longer be the person in charge and to have to be, it's kind of trite, but a smaller fish in a bigger pond.
Yeah. How do you be number two once you've been number one? Once you're the one, how do you go to number two?
Right.
It's a big shift in ego. It's a big shift in mindset.
So how do you take your foot off the gas? You can't take your foot off. You got a Ferrari in between a corporation. I mean, now it's going to bang into a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So essentially, David was used to basically speaking his mind whenever he wanted to as CEO. And so he'd sit in a meeting, and while everybody else is talking, his brain's racing, and he'd just blurt stuff out and say what he was on his mind. And he managed to just rub a lot of people the wrong way.
I don't know anybody like that.
He invested in biomass, by the way.
Oh, nice. Fantastic.
So,
Yeah.
And so it took about 6 months. And finally Herb sat him down and said, David, this isn't working. Why don't you go back to Utah and continue running Morris during the transition? And
I'm guessing that David had some choice words for him that we might not use in the podcast for that.
no, I doubt that.
Really?
Yeah. I think David could see the handwriting on the wall.
Okay.
And so he left. And of course, David had signed a 5-year non-compete as part of joining the company and making, as part of the acquisition, it was a closing condition. And so David needed to wait out his non-compete.
5 years. That's an eternity for someone that moves that fast, huh?
Generally speaking, 3 years is about the maximum that's enforceable under the law. So David went to Herb and said, Herb, come on, let me out of my non-compete at 3 years. And Herb said, you signed the document. And, or something to that effect. And so David lived with it. He could have sued Southwest, but he just waited it out. In the meantime, because of his reputation at Morris, some folks in Calgary, Canada, were starting up an airline called WestJet.
Yeah.
And so they enlisted David as an advisor. He was an investor, an advisor. I think he was on the board early on. And he helped get them started again in the model of Southwest. So, you know, there's a pattern here, you know.
Customer centric, cheap fares,
Yep, and 737s.
and 737s.
So, you know, the same kind of high efficiency, low cost, cheap fare, quality customer service mindset.
And he knew how to get planes. I'm sure he knew a few people.
So when does he come back to you? Did you know this whole time he was cooking?
I knew he was going to start another airline, and he got back to me in '98. He said, "Hey, look, I'm going to be in town in Dallas for some other business. Want to get together for dinner? Go out for some Tex-Mex." I said, "Sure."
Who says no to Tex-Mex, right?
Yeah. So, you know, we had our Tex-Mex dinner and then retired to the lobby of his hotel for about another 3 hours worth of talking. And he laid out his whole idea for what became JetBlue and just told me all about, you know, how he was going to do it, what was going to happen, and where it was going to be based and everything. And I was like, wow, that was really interesting. But he never asked me.
I was going to ask you, is there an ask in there?
No.
You were just revved up, excited by the idea?
Well, I thought there was an ulterior motive there, too.
Say more about that.
He was revved up about the idea. But the next day I went to work. went into the library in the legal department and pulled out the bound volume from the closing from Morris Air acquisition and flipped through it and looked at David's non-compete agreement, because non-compete agreements typically have non-compete and non-solicitation. That is, you can't try to hire.
No pillaging.
So he can't ask you, but you can ask him.
Right. So I put two and two together. And so then I wrote him a letter.
Brilliant. Right?
In the old, days, I sent him a letter.
We still write letters. They just have lots of emojis in them.
Yeah. And my view was I had to lay out the facts. So I was like, hey, David, I really enjoyed, chatting with you. I loved all of the concept. And I half expected you to say, was I interested in joining you? And I said, then I went and, read your agreement and realized you couldn't. So I said, I guess the ball's in my court. Since you can't ask me, I have to ask you. Are you interested? And frankly, I felt like Benedict Arnold because I was so loyal to Southwest. But it just seemed like a pretty cool opportunity.
Also feels like you guys had something special from a friendship and a relationship perspective, and that goes further than most people realize in business.
Right. It does. So I wrote it figuring if Southwest ever got angry and wanted to sue, which I thought was virtually impossible that they would do it. That's just not the way Herb works. But I wrote it so that there'd be a path explained in writing if it ever needed to be discovered in a lawsuit.
Postage stamp and everything, huh?
Pardon?
Postage stamp and everything.
Yeah.
Gotta get that paper trail. That's amazing.
What was it about his vision that was so compelling? Was there any particular part of it? Because you both had overlapping skills. He could buy planes, you could buy planes. Right? So, and he built a company. You've obviously been a part of Southwest, but what in his vision, great leaders have great visions. Those visions are what becomes the recruiting engine for talent.
Right.
Do you remember distinctly what it was that he said that intrigued you about this opportunity? Or should I ask it differently? Was it the idea of what he wanted to build, the horse, or was it the jockey?
I've never liked that question.
Why is that?
Well, because I think it's both. I think you need a great team and you also need a great concept. If you can't have both, I vote for the team. But, ideally, you get both. What was interesting was, just a chance to, one, to be CFO. But, I didn't.
So personal ambition.
Yeah. I didn't see myself making it. There was a first-rate CFO at Southwest, and, I didn't see myself moving into that position anytime soon.
Just because he held the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, until he retires or decides to leave, you're waiting for that spot to open.
Yeah, and at that point in time, I would say he was the best CFO in the airline business.
Wow.
So, Southwest had a great asset. He went on to become the CEO at Southwest. So that said a lot about it. But I saw this opportunity to, have a bigger role in senior management. Not just to be CFO, but to be part of the true leadership team. When we started it, there were four of us. Dave Barger, the president, Tom Kelly, the executive vice president and general counsel, who'd been working with David for years, David and me. We were called the exec crew. Everybody was crew at JetBlue.
Love it.
And so basically we met every week, and every significant issue in the company we talked about and debated and decided. And that was a level of input that I never had at Southwest. So it was an opportunity to do that and to build something.
I'm very much like a David.
Okay.
My name is David, but I'm also very much like a David. I move very, very quickly.
Patience, speed, agility, lack of formality in certain cases.
It sounds like Southwest was fast, but David was even faster.
Right.
So and it could just be your speaking style and your maturity, seem like a very reserved, paced gentleman. How did you transition into this super speed with David?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. David would say he found Southwest very bureaucratic. It wasn't, in my view. But compared to being the single leader who made all the decisions and, acted very fast at Morris, Southwest to him seemed slow and plodding by comparison. But Southwest was a fast-paced environment the whole time I worked there. I was there for 14 years. We started with 51 airplanes when I got there, and we were around 175, 180 when I left.
Wow.
Yeah,
Fast.
that was significant growth. So it really wasn't a change to say it's going to be fast-paced at JetBlue. I knew it would be fast. It turned out faster than I thought. Particularly when you get started and, we, at the very beginning, you could put all the people in the company around this table.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you have anybody you can delegate to initially.
Yeah, what was that like for you? And I'm curious because, we deal with a lot of people who have built like software startups. So obviously, you have, two people in a garage and they build something and it goes on to scale or whatever. Running an airline company is incredibly labor intensive in some ways. So you've got 4 people around a table.
Right.
You're meeting every week, you're discussing, you're debating, you're deciding. How did you go about going from the 4 people at the table to we have an airline now?
A lot of rapid hiring. Because when I joined at the end of 98, basically the January 1 of 99, we had money from private equity investors. We had no name. We had no gates. We had no airplanes. We did not have a certificate from the DOT or a certificate from the FAA to operate. Everything had to be created from scratch. The pacing item for everything was aircraft. You can't start writing manuals for all of how everything is being handled by pilots, flight attendants, maintenance, airports and stuff until you know the airplane you're writing about. So step 1 was talking to Boeing and Airbus. So, hit the ground running. I think my second day on the job, I was in Seattle. And that's an interesting story all by itself in terms of acquiring the aircraft.
Let's have it.
Well, Southwest flew 737s. David flew 737s. WestJet, where he'd advised, flew 737s. Basically, everybody around the globe who was trying to copy the Southwest model, they virtually all flew 737s. So the expectation...
High demand, low supply.
Yeah. So the expectation was, between David and John, this company's going to fly the 737. And David literally cold called Airbus North America. Said, my name's David Neeleman. I used to run Morris Air. I'm starting a new airline. I want to talk to you about the A320. And I wasn't on the call, but the way it's been related to me, the guy at Airbus said, "Hey, we know about you. We know you flew the 737, and we know you've hired Owen, and he came from Southwest." He goes, "Are you just talking to us to try to get a better deal out of Boeing?" David said, "Well, Boeing existed before Airbus, right?" The guy goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Virtually every airline you've ever sold to already flew Boeing airplanes, and you had to convince them to buy Airbus, right?" He goes, "Yeah." And David said, "Then convince me."
Hell of a question.
Yeah. And less than 2 months, we'd signed a term sheet with Airbus. It was pretty radical. I think it floored all the people in Seattle.
Why is that? Because of the timing, or just
Because they had, they knew David, they knew me. I think they just thought they had it in the bag. I can't speak for them, but it was really interesting because Airbus had a super salesman, the top guy worldwide for sales by the name of John Leahy. His nickname was the Boeing Killer. And Leahy had, at one point in his life, lived in the New York environs. And I remember sitting down with David and the Airbus sales guy and John Leahy in New York City in a small conference room at a hotel. And David hauls out a map of the New York metropolitan area and lays it out and starts talking about how many people live so close to JFK and why JFK would work. And just like Newark had worked for People Express back in the early 80s, and went through the whole spiel, and Leahy was like, "Got it. I understand." And one thing that had always rubbed Airbus sales, and Leahy in particular, rubbed them the wrong way, was the fact that every time they competed against Boeing for a low-cost carrier, Boeing's answer was, "Well, you don't want to take a risk on that A320. The 737's tried and true. You just look at Southwest and all the people who've copied them, and they all do this."
nobody ever gets fired for hiring IBM, right? So they're the IBM of air.
Yeah. So his view was this was an opportunity, if he could land JetBlue, to get huge press in, major media market, New York City, for a low-cost carrier operating the A320. And he got it. It broke the logjam, and low-cost carriers started migrating to the A320, and it became a huge chunk of Airbus's A320 business. So he absolutely, he focused on winning the business, and it was part of a grand plan, and it worked out absolutely fabulously for Airbus.
You refer to David as having a fertile mind. He obviously had the wherewithal to go after the Airbus, ticketless travel. He invented ticketless travel.
That is correct.
He put customer service reps. He made home-based customer service reps for the airline. Right? First to do that. And then put TVs, obviously, most famously put TVs in every single seat on the planes for JetBlue.
Right.
I want to get
no. But what I want to know is, I want to get inside of your head. How do you manage or
direct
manage or direct someone like that, right? Because I'm thinking about it from like the perspective of the people around me, because I'm a very much fertile mind. What are the dangers? What are the positives and the dangers? What are the management techniques that you guys had around the table to keep David fertile, thinking of more ideas, being an innovator, but at the same time keeping yourselves out of danger? Because obviously he could be dangerous as well.
Yeah, there never really was any danger.
Okay.
Well, distraction and focus. I'd imagine as you expanded from those four people around the table, like the size of this table, the company starts getting bigger and you're buying the aircrafts, a really vision-driven CEO and leader like David
Is a hair away from crazy.
can ultimately cause what I would call organizational whiplash, right? Where everyone's running this direction, and now we got to focus here and focus here. So it feels like it could be a lot for people, but clearly you didn't have a challenge with that.
No, we had some of those challenges, for sure. The key was, Tom Kelly, who'd worked for many years with David, really understood David. David's ADHD, self-diagnosed, but I think you spend enough time around him and you would agree, even if you don't have the appropriate degree to make the diagnosis.
You're sitting across from two people that have ADHD.
Okay. There's a great story that Tom tells about David. I believe it was David's mother had sent him an article about 21 traits of people who have ADHD. And David said, Tom, here's this really interesting article about people who have ADHD. I haven't had time to read it, and gave it to him. It was a classic example of that. And I read it, and I could say that 20 of those 21 traits were David. And David would absolutely swear that those are the traits that made him a success.
Superpower.
Yeah, exactly. But Tom and Dave Barger and I had a little alliance of sorts.
Here we go.
And it was, look, David has all kinds of great ideas, but some of them are duds. And when there's a dud, the three of us need to gang up on him and convince him that it's a dud. And it worked. There weren't that many cases where we needed to do that, but it did work.
What are some techniques? So clearly that's a great nugget of wisdom, being able to team up as a leadership team to identify what ideas are not in pursuit of the grand vision or a good idea. So what's a dud, if you would. But when you're getting like a multiplicity, lots of ideas that are happening at once, I'd have to imagine no matter how big or how fast or how much you're growing, there's always going to be a limitation on, human resources,
right,
financial resources. So you can't chase every bet, essentially. So how do you go about delivering on the appetite of a driven, impatient CEO while also balancing the needs of the organization and the constraints that you have?
It takes a lot of work.
So strong work ethic is what you're saying.
That's part of it. And the other is, just good communication.
What makes good communication? I hear that a lot, but I want to understand from someone like yourself, how would you describe good communication? If I was shadowing you for a week and saying, help me understand how to be a great communicator, what would that look like for you?
First and foremost, you got to be able to connect with people. And second, in my mind, you have to be able to make a good, solid, logical, reasoned argument. And David would listen to good arguments if you have the facts and the data behind it to back you up.
Right.
And so, if you saw David, suggesting something and you didn't like the idea, I'd tell him. I'd tell him precisely why. Right. And he respected the rest of us. David liked to say we hired people with more degrees than he had because he dropped out of college, and more smarts than he had, and he was proud of doing that. But I'll give you an example of David making quick decisions. This was at Morris. David was a firm believer that people are motivated by money. And he had arranged a pay schedule for the reservation agents at Morris that focused on how many bookings you made. And, you got bonuses of, I don't remember the details, but you got more pay basically based on more bookings. And they had this woman who was this outstanding reservation agent. She was like off the charts on the bookings. And somebody monitored her and discovered that what she did was, if you called up and wanted to ask a question and she didn't think there was a booking in it, she hung up on you. Over and over and over. She only wanted to deal with sort of hot prospects.
Not great for the customer experience of that organization.
So, he learned. It was a good lesson. You think about it. Hey, that makes sense to go and motivate people that way, except when people can game it.
Every system can be gamed somehow, right?
Yes.
Interesting.
People will game what they can.
Yeah, for sure.
I love the fact that people thought you guys were crazy. It's a theme, right? Whenever you have a David, when you have people that are forward obsessed, as we like to say, people focused on innovation, there's lots of people that become naysayers. There's lots of people that will call you crazy until you're not crazy anymore. You obviously didn't need convincing. You knew you weren't crazy, right?
Right.
But things got a little crazy for you guys. You were supposed to IPO in September of 2011.
Yeah, 9/11 was a very interesting experience, to say the least. In July, board meeting of 2011, or what am I saying? 2001, 9/11, 2001. That summer, the board said, get to work. We want an IPO as fast as you can file with the SEC. So we laid out a 62-day game plan. My controller did. She was, in charge of all the SEC-related documents and things. And so we laid out this game plan of how we were going to get from here to there. We beat it by a day. We pulled an all-nighter on Monday the 10th at Printers in Lower Manhattan. Went to a hotel around 4 o'clock in the morning to get some sleep while they did the final, what's called Edgarizing of the document to get it ready to file with the SEC. And the idea was that we would come back around 9 in the morning, make sure everything was right, press the button and send. And of course, instead, the 2 towers of the World Trade Center were burning at 9 in the morning. So we never did file. And of course, the airlines were all shut down. And for 3 days, no airplanes flew. And so this was kind of existential for the whole industry at that point. Like, what's going to happen? Are people going to come back? And instead of tracking how many bookings you had every day, you tracked how many bookings disappeared every day as people called to cancel. And I'll get back to that in a minute, because they canceled and we gave them credit for future flight. But it was a scary time. Even for a wild-eyed optimist like David, it was, highly worrisome. So the first thing we did is we went back to our private equity investors and arranged for them to infuse more money in the company. Based on that, we went to all the lenders who were going to lend for all the airplanes we had delivering and talked through the game plan, the fact that we'd raise more equity and everything else, and every lender stayed with us. If I recall correctly, we had one bank that raised the interest rate on the loan. And otherwise, everyone stood with us, including, this is a great story. We had a plane delivering on Wednesday, the day after 9/11, at Airbus.
Wow.
And so, it was a wonderful gentleman of a banker in London, whose name escapes me at the moment. And so our treasurer called him on 9/11 and said, I assume you're going to invoke material adverse change and not close on the airplane tomorrow. And he goes, we're closing. He goes, we are not going to let terrorists win. We are closing. And they stood by it and financed the airplane while the airline was grounded.
You didn't know what was going to happen.
What's really remarkable is the change that happened after 9/11. All the airlines were losing money. They were cutting back in a world-class way. And it actually created some opportunities for JetBlue in its own perverse way because of the massive retrenching that was going on with the bigger carriers. But the most amazing thing that happened was we had an engineer in our technical operations department, Amir Nasruddin. And Amir said, hey, look, I can come up with a way to reinforce the cockpit door with Kevlar and put in some titanium deadbolts, and we can have a bulletproof cockpit door. Cockpit door that you can come running down the aisle with one of those beverage carts laden, and you'll bounce off of it. And so he said, we got one problem. There's one FAA requirement I can't meet. We went to the FAA and said, you willing to waive this requirement if we do this? And they said yes. And it's a temporary waiver thing. So he had designed it and ordered up the materials. They implemented it on one door, and our ace PR guy, who had connections like I've never seen, got every major network out to see the armored cockpit door. Bookings took off. Now, we had a fleet of 17 airplanes. We had one armored cockpit door at that point. We got them all done in a matter of a couple of weeks, but it totally changed the trajectory of bookings.
Because people felt safe. They felt like they could trust you.
Right. That we were doing the right thing.
Innovation creates PR opportunity. We did that here at District when COVID hit. We had Stanley come in and put automatic doors where you just wave at the door and no touch, and just used it as a PR opportunity to tell people that we're making it safer for them. Right. And they came back and we tracked it.
Right.
Yeah.
And initially it was PR because we only had one.
Yeah.
But we had the fleet outfitted quickly after that.
Is that a standard now?
It became standard. And then Boeing and Airbus each designed their own door that for each of their airplanes that complied with all the FAA standards. And we, threw away all our old doors and put the new doors on. So yeah, that became standard. Anyway, we were profitable again in the month of December.
Wow.
So the board said, then let's turn the IPO back on. So, we spent January and early February getting the books closed and, modifying the original document that we had planned for the SEC. You put risk factors in these documents. Well, the idea of terrorist attacks was not among the risk factors in September, but it was the number one leading risk factor when we refiled. We refiled in February, and we went public on the 12th of April.
How was the debut of the stock?
That was a wild day. We'd filed at one price range. We upped the price range. We then upped it again and priced at the top of the range. But everybody saw it as a hot stock. And so we priced at 27, and it opened somewhere in the mid-30s.
Wow.
And closed the day at something like 45.
Good day.
Cool.
That was a good day. And then because there wasn't that much float out there, it kept going up. And it kind of got ridiculous. The stock price was so high. We had an interesting circumstance. You may remember that Wall Street got in trouble for sell-side analysts touting stocks that the companies were underwriting. So they changed the rules for sell-side analysts, that they could not be involved in the whole IPO process, and that they couldn't publish an opinion until a fixed number of days after the IPO. So we had 4 underwriters, and the analyst for one of those firms, when his 20 days were up and the stock was through the roof, he came out with a sell. And it made the papers. It made the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, everything else, because this was new. Nobody's ever seen an analyst put a sell recommendation on a stock. When they were one of the underwriting firms. And of course, David was just really frustrated. And I said, David, can you justify the price that the stock is at right now? And he goes, no. He said, it's crazy. I said, just remember, he did you a favor. He pricked the balloon. And the stock started coming back down after that sell recommendation. And so it all worked out great in the end.
There's something about, so Pete and I are very much into design. As a business weapon, a weapon of business. JetBlue has, as far back as I can remember, and I was a big fan of JetBlue when they first launched in JFK in New York, I've always noticed that there was an emphasis on design. The brand was well designed.
Just the name.
The name, the innovations, the TVs, ticketless travel, the app. You always seemed like you were a cut above as a low cost carrier. You acted as a cut above even luxury carriers. Who brought that emphasis of design to the table, and how did it play out?
Well, obviously, it was part of David's grant plan. He liked to say, we're going to be like Southwest, but better than Southwest. Because, for instance, he didn't like the idea that Southwest had no assigned seats, the open seating. He thought it was the biggest weakness of Southwest. So from the get-go, we were going to have assigned seating like everyone else. But there were lots of little decisions along the way. And in addition to David, we had a head of marketing who, she was just amazing at branding. When they were having a hard time coming up with a name for the company, she basically said, David, I don't care what you name it. We can build a brand around anything. Just give me a name and we'll build the brand. And so there were, tons of little pieces to that. Whether it's uniforms, whether it's, the live television, whether it's having flight attendants use a tray up and down the aisle so that the aisle isn't blocked most of the flight by carts. That was all part of the brand. We had better legroom than a lot of the major carriers. We had leather seats. And, I know I had plenty of people, ask me, well, wait a minute, leather seats, that costs a lot of money. You're a low-cost carrier. This doesn't make sense. I said, well, we kind of ran the numbers on it. The leather costs about twice as much as the cloth, and it lasts about twice as long.
It also made people feel
More premium.
more premium. It made me, I thought,
Yeah, we were two broke young guys.
I felt like I was in first class. I was like, this is a first-class airline. It wasn't until later on I figured out that it was a discount airline, but I was like, this is a first-class airline making really cheap tickets right now to grow. I thought it was a different strategy.
Yes.
But I felt important.
We used to fly to all our business meetings in JetBlue.
Always.
Like early days. And we were broke. I mean, when we were starting the company, we had no money, but we felt like, we were living high off dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the whole approach was to try to make it a good experience. And
where did David get all that design mind from? It sounds like it was his background in design or creativity. It sounds like he was just
a customer service focused person.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it was interesting with our first ad agency. I remember sitting in on a meeting at their offices in Manhattan when they were first getting going with ideation and things, and they presented us with the result of a quick little study that they had done about industries. They'd never had an airline as a client before.
It's a dream account for an ad agency.
Yeah. And they said, we did some research, and basically, on a scale of 1 to 100, airlines are like down in the single digits with, used car salesmen and people like that. How do we market this? David said, it's real easy. Look how low the bar is. If people hate airlines that much, then if we can just consistently deliver a good product with the right attitude, then we'll blow the rest of them away. And that's what we're here to do. And again, it got back to hiring based on attitude, so that you had people who were customer service focused.
Well, you guys did a great job, an incredible job. One of the things that I read in the show notes is that you focused on values instead of a mission. You had 5 values.
Oh, yes.
Rather than a mission statement.
We had a great mission statement at Southwest, but it was a couple sentences long. Nobody was ever going to remember it. And so when we got started at JetBlue, it was like, we're going to have values and we're going to preach, live in the values. So we had about maybe 20 people, and we had an offsite at a hotel conference room with easels and whiteboards, and like, we're going to come up with our core values. And so everybody threw different ideas, and our idea was the values would be individual words. Keep it short and simple. And so everybody threw out ideas and stuff, and we put them up on the board, and then we argued about them, and it was just a wonderful free-for-all. We actually had a guy who later came to work for us. He was in town for his interview that day. So to figure out if he was a good culture fit, they just invited him along. So here's a guy on a job interview sitting around with the rest of the company as we talk through all the values. And we came up with 5. Safety, caring, integrity, fun, and passion. And the idea was 5, everybody can memorize it. We'll beat it into them during training. We will print it on everybody's employee ID. And that was it. And I remember them making fun of me in the meeting. I said, hey, John, do you really want passionate accountants in your finance department? I kind of making fun of it. And I said, damn right we do. Well, people care about getting it right. And, we, like, the first one was safety. We had a big argument. Everybody said, well, safety goes without saying. It's just a given in our business. And in the end, it was, we want everybody to have a constant reminder, even if it goes without saying. So not only did we keep it, but we made it the first of the 5.
Who do you admire in the airline space right now? Who do you think's doing it right?
It's a good question.
You like this group that just moved into New Haven, Avello?
I don't know enough about them.
They filled the need.
Yes,
They're filling planes.
it's a concept that I just don't know enough about.
It's the opposite of you guys.
Yeah, it's infrequent flights, just a couple days a week. So it's a completely different business model.
They didn't even upgrade the planes when they bought them. Like, I got on and I remember looking at the seatbelt and I was like, oh man, this plane is old. Like, the seatbelt was like, I felt like I was in a 70-something Buick. Maybe, I don't even know if there were seatbelts in the 70 Buicks, but it felt like a very old plane. They just recently started updating the interiors. But that was the one thing. Filled a need, opposite. No leg room. Clearly a lack of design. Uniforms are like just denim jeans and a white shirt. And the one thing that I hear is people love the convenience, but I hear people are afraid of the age of the planes because they show their age.
That's the way a lot of startup carriers are.
Okay.
And I will tell you, Morris's fleet looked that way.
Okay.
They picked up a lot of used airplanes. The seating was different on a lot of them. They had, different quantities of seats, different manufacturers of seats, other things like that. So one of the things that David wanted to do with JetBlue was, let's start with all brand new airplanes and make them all identical so that we don't have the mishmash of things like that. And the brand new airplanes will impress people who might not want to fly a startup airline, a brand new airline. But if you got the leather seats, and the gray color was chosen as a calming color, all kinds of little things, whether it's, flight attendant uniforms, that sort of thing. Everything was designed to present an air of professionalism.
I think you guys revolutionized the space. I think that you influenced Delta to upgrade their planes and to make new design decisions. I started to see the JetBlue influence start to unfold. Not right away. I feel like people fought against it for a while. And then over time, I watched JetBlue's influence start to happen across multiple airlines. I don't know, maybe that's just from my view in, but it felt like JetBlue was really leading.
Yeah, Delta created a brand within a brand called Song.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To go specifically after JetBlue.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it didn't work.
I was saying,
It felt
I
fake.
mean,
We flew
Yeah.
Song, remember?
yeah, it felt really forced. The problem with copycatting is a lot of times, in my opinion, when you copycat something else, it's because there's a lack of originality that you have when you're copycatting it. So you miss the core essence and the DNA that made it special. And people feel like it's a copycat. And who wants to be a part of a knockoff, Unconsciously and consciously.
Amy Curtis, our head of marketing, brilliant branding person. And she could just be caustically sarcastic in a wonderful way. And her comment about Song, Delta Song, was when you have to try hard to be hip, you're not.
Yeah, it's true.
And she nailed it.
So ultimately, post-IPO, all the stressors that come with it, I know you're getting a lot more folks reporting to you. I'd imagine the culture changed a bit post-IPO. It wasn't quite the few people around the table when you first began, right?
Well, yeah, in growing companies, things are constantly changing. But I wouldn't say the culture changed all that much.
Okay.
Dave Barger, our original president, his comment was, whenever you think you're over-communicating, double it. You just always need to communicate with your staff.
It's a great point.
And so we would hold sessions like at JFK in the employee break room where, David and I would all show up and we'd fill people in on what was going on and we'd field questions. And it was designed to make people, feel part of the team.
So after you decided to leave and exit JetBlue, what, with all that sort of wealth of learning, what was the motivating factor that ultimately drew you to Volite? Volite? Did I say that right?
Yeah, Volite.
Volite.
The guys who founded Volite had previously founded an airline called Welling in Spain. And again, it was a sort of a Southwest type clone. There's so many airlines like that. And I'd had a chance to meet them when I was at JetBlue. I subsequently left JetBlue, and they had their airline sold out from underneath them. The management team didn't want to sell, but unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for them. So again, they sort of waited out their non-compete and decided to start another airline. And so approached me and see if I'd help out. And so I was, acting chief financial officer, unpaid during the time period while they were trying to put the business plan together and raise the money and everything else. And that was an interesting experience because it was hard raising money at that point in time.
2008, right? That's like right after the housing bust.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, dry markets.
Yeah.
Did they have a good leader? Did they have the David?
Yeah. Different kind of leader.
Okay.
The CEO is a guy named Carlos Munoz, and Carlos is a Harvard MBA, former McKinsey consultant.
Smartest guy in the room.
So far more detailed analytics than David Neeleman. David had a watch with a little calculator on the side of it, and David would love to punch numbers into his calculator and try to make decisions. And David, let us analyze the numbers a little more deeply than that before we make a decision. So Carlos was kind of the opposite of David in that respect. So quite the contrast, really.
Understood. Well, John, this has been an incredible journey. I don't know. You have had such an interesting career, and you've built, I think, one of the best brands in the airline industry ever, because I just love JetBlue and I'm a big fan. And to be a part of it, the only thing I would ask is that we make a distinction between entrepreneur and intrapreneur. You clearly played the intrapreneurial role here, with David, where you saw a guy who had this great vision. You saw a great opportunity to move up. You clearly care. Where you hit that role. You had a great attitude. You clearly care. There's a lot of people out there that can be a great number two, right, to a founder, but they struggle to get to that mentality. Is there something you could say to those people, to help them fill into that role? Because there's a lot of Davids out there, but there are not a lot of John Owens, right? John Owen. What would you say to those people that could potentially fill a great number two role and build a world-class, renowned brand and business?
I'd say not everybody's cut out to be a CEO. It was not a job I aspired to. I was fine playing my role. it's really hard to give advice on that topic.
What is the self-awareness you had that made you not aspire to be the CEO?
It's a tough job. The buck absolutely stops there. And that was a level of pressure I didn't think I wanted. And if you're going to do it right, you have to be a great communicator and a great motivator. And I think I'm a pretty good communicator, but I'm not necessarily, I'm a sort of quiet reason kind of communicator. And that's not typically the kind of traits that you see in, leaders of organizations as CEOs. So it wasn't something I aspired to, and David knew that, and I knew that, but I was playing a role that I knew I could play.
It's a great answer.
You strike me as hyper competitive, but you have such a sense of humility and kind of calm and warming. And I can see how, I would work for someone like you. I can see how you would be a welcoming and a supportive leader. And I think that that's really important in number two from what I'm seeing. I think there's this natural inclination, especially in what I call celebrity entrepreneurs as we see today, where there's a gravitas, a charisma, an over-the-top notion about a lot of CEOs. And people gravitate towards that. I call that the Kardashian effect, right? It's what we see on Instagram, and everyone sort of goes to that. But what I don't think a lot of people see, and I'm so grateful for you to spend time with us today, is that the magic behind what people think is the magic is that steady hand that is focused and humble and has a sense of humility. I mean, you've done such incredible things, but having this conversation with you, spending this time with you, we had to pull it out of you, right? Versus I think a lot of the dynamic CEOs that we've had in the chair you're sitting in, they tell us how great they are. We've had to tell you how great you are. And I think that there's something special about that. So I appreciate you modeling that for the audience and for the time that you've had.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I would now, based off of this conversation, I would now modify the question from horse, jockey, and trainers. I don't know if David would have been as successful without the group, without the four horsemen. I think you guys gave him the separation and that style of communication and that calmness. I'm assuming it feels like
it sounds like you
wrapped around him to make him successful.
Amen. I would say that you helped him cash the checks that he wrote. He wrote a lot of checks on that little calculator watch, right?
It takes a team.
Yeah.
And we all knew our roles. And it was a team that just really meshed and worked well at senior management.
John, I love this interview. We love the fact that you came down from New Canaan to visit us here at District. And to be on Forward Obsessed, we're honored to have you. And this was a great interview, and we just can't say thank you enough.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
It's been really enjoyable.
Thank you so much.
All right.
That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. This episode was hosted by Pete Senna and David Salinas from the Digital Surgeons Podcast Studio in New Haven, Connecticut. Special thanks to our AV crew, Steve Walter and Meg Olson. Forward Obsessed is produced by Robert Roach. If you'd like to contact our team, visit us at forwardobsessed.com.